Hey, it's Mike here, and today, sperm. Yes, we are going there. A recent study out of Germany directly put vegan versus meat eater sperm in a bit of a showdown against each other, and they looked at a bunch of different metrics like sperm quality and DNA integrity of the sperm and on and on. We're also gonna look at some other studies that could explain the differences on mechanism and more, and I'm gonna try to keep it reasonable and not make too many jokes. It's hard to not make jokes on these types of subjects, but in terms of the results of the study, you're just gonna have to wait and see, man. Semen. And I have to mention just one sentence about the Iceland trip. I was shocked and amazed that it just pretty much immediately filled up within a few hours. So sorry for everybody that didn't get on the list, but this means more trips, absolutely. Stay tuned for that. Anyway, let's get a little bit of context here in terms of the sperm quality of the world. We have seen declining sperm quality in the Western world specifically. You know, there's probably a ton of factors, and it's also the case that about 5% of US men are technically infertile, so this is definitely an issue, and that's one of the better numbers out there. I mean, Eastern Europe, unfortunately, is like 10%. According to this study. And of course there is a cultural meat masculinity tie, and so is it the case that eating all those plants makes you a soy boy and eating meat makes you more of a man? We're gonna have to look to the results, but that brings me to the actual study basics. The study is this one. It was published in the Journal of Reproductive Sciences, and it looked at a ton of metrics from the volume that was emitted to, of course, the sperm count and the oxidative stress, the motility, and the DNA integrity, as I mentioned before. Quick note, there were also no conflicts of interest reported in the study. And I'll be the first to say that this was not a large study. It was 20 men. It should be replicated. We'll talk more about that in a second. But what it does have going for it is some very statistically significant findings, even at this size. And they also did a good job of controlling for various factors. Like they made sure that nobody was smoking, nobody was drinking. They also matched the vegan versus meat eaters pretty well. They did the same age approximately. They did the same BMI. In fact, everybody was in a normal BMI, which is good. And they were all asked to keep their physical activity constant before the study. And they were told to not let anything out for 4 days prior so that there was some more consistent results. Anyway, let's get to the main, probably most important metric that people are looking for, and that is sperm count. I am Count Sperm, and I am a dyslexic vampire. No, dude, we're talking about sperm count. Get it right? Oops, wrong show. Sometimes I have to ask myself if I am mature enough to do a video about this, and I would like to say yes, just barely. Anyway, sperm count, if you don't know, is a function, really an estimate of how many sperm cells are in a sample. And for a quick clarification, sperm count can sort of mean two things. It can mean the sperm count per milliliter, which is concentration, or in this case, it really focuses on total sperm count, which is that concentration times the volume for the total amount in the sample. And the result was honestly shocking. The vegans had almost twice the sperm count, really 188% of the meat eater sperm count, which is honestly ridiculous. We're talking an estimated 120 million versus 225 million for the vegans. So I was not expecting this much of a difference. Heck, from this chart, the lowest count in the vegan group was about the average meat eater count. And of course, you have to look at this from all angles. You might think maybe it was actually that there was a higher concentration, so much so in the vegan group, but there was actually less, and then it scored higher on the count. But no, it actually was the case that the volume was also larger in the vegan group. It wasn't statistically significantly larger, but it was about 25% more. And the reason I thought about that first is because even just increasing calorie consumption can change these numbers. And perhaps if somebody's eating super high protein, maybe in theory that would upregulate some hormones. It doesn't appear to be the case here. And as I've mentioned in the past, vegans have equivalent free testosterone and higher total testosterone, just worth mentioning. We'll talk more about hormones in a bit, but this brings me to the next metric, which was the rapid motility metric of the sperm. Basically, how many of those Speedy Gonzalez sperms do you have in there? Or if you just speak in TikTok,
you wanna see some real speed, bitch? I'll show you some real speed.
And this rapid mobility metric was possibly the most shocking at all, with the vegans being on average 17 times higher between the two groups, because the meat eaters were just really flopping in this. They were at 1% of their sperm being rapidly motile, while vegans were at 17%. And can you imagine if these were some results that we were getting for the vegans and this was flipped? This would be front page news and it would be used against vegans for years. Instead, nobody even hears about it because it's bad news about your bad habits. I don't know. And for those that are going an in vitro fertilization route for whatever reason, this is an important metric because it is very correlated to how successful IVF can be according to this study. And it makes sense because it's about how well that sperm cell can swim all the way over to where it needs to be at that egg to do the business. And since this is a new finding, we mostly just have to speculate about this. And one thing I thought at first was maybe because vegans tend to have lower insulin resistance and better insulin sensitivity, which means they can get glucose from their bloodstream into their cells a little bit better depending on the age. This was a young group, but that could mean that these sperm actually could have more energy from a more even glucose level. Anyway, it's more likely that it's actually an oxidative stress related issue. And that brings me to the next marker, which was an oxidative stress one. And quick refresher on oxidative stress, it's implicated in disease and aging, and it is usually caused by free radicals, which are molecules that are missing an electron in their outer shell, and then it kind of sucks up other electrons like a vacuum and can end up ripping apart cells and DNA, which we'll get to in a little bit here. But looking to the sperm's oxidative stress reactivity, or really just oxidation resistance, lower is better here. As you can see from this chart, the vegans did significantly better. This was statistically significant, and they point to this being potentially connected to that increase in motility. And it's also worth mentioning that vegans eat all these plant foods with more antioxidants, which are going to buffer that oxidative stress, gets in the bloodstream, helps out everywhere. And to bolster the vegetable perspective, it's not new here. From the study, they say other researchers have reported that low intake of meat and high consumption of fruits, vegetables, and whole grains are linked with increased total sperm count. And this is a really important metric because, as they say, quote, high reactive oxidative species, or free radical levels, and oxidative stress have been correlated with sperm DNA damage, impaired fertilization, etc., etc. And that brings me to their DNA result. And they say, quote, the proportion of spermatozoan with DNA damage, 14.7 versus 8.2, were significantly higher in the non-vegan group in comparison to the vegan group. And this is no joke because we're talking about the integrity of the genes that are delivered during reproduction. You definitely want that to be intact. And yes, that result was statistically significant, and they did not go ahead and make a chart for this, but you can see from this one that I made, but we're talking about 80% more DNA damage in the meat-eating group. There's a trend of, approaching twice as bad in many circumstances.
Hey guys, my name is Meat Sperm. I didn't make it this time, but next time I'll probably make it. What, my lifespan's like 5 days max? Oh no.
But actually, to be fair, in terms of this study, the morphology rating of sperm was actually equivalent. So we're not seeing a bunch of deformed sperm in the meat eater group. Now let's talk about some other dietary causes. We have the antioxidant intake that could be bridging this gap, but then we also have to talk about high levels of cholesterol because, as this review points out, several studies have shown high levels of cholesterol associated with lower sperm count, and that can be associated with things like obesity and a poor lifestyle, but it is also the case that it could be the oxidation of the LDL cholesterol, for example, that can cause that oxidative stress and lower sperm quality. And a really interesting figure from that study, they say that oxidative stress is responsible for between 30 and 80% of male factor infertility. That's a wide range, but yeah, this is a big deal. And a lot of times that's probably from smoking or alcohol, and both of those were more or less controlled for in this situation. And you might be thinking, hey, what about dairy and hormones? I've talked about studies in the past where drinking milk raises estrogen statistically significantly, this one here. But the question is, could that play a role? Is dairy associated? And we have a bit of a mixed signal, which is perfectly summed up by this study, where skim milk consumption was actually associated with a bit better sperm count. Again, the hormones are in the fat of the dairy, so then it makes sense why the cheese consumption was associated with decreased sperm quality. It could also be the case that people that drink skim milk are doing it because they want to be healthier. They have other health factors that could play a role there. I get to zoom out to the big picture here and ask, where does this fit into that meat and masculinity narrative? And this is where I'm just gonna seem way too self-satisfied as a vegan, because We just get so much crap from this whole hypermasculinity angle of, soy boys, blah-de, blah-de, blah. I mean, this is one of the main metrics of how effective you are as a male, genetically, biologically, and we're talking like twice as good, from this study at least. And I can't help but think of this future post-apocalyptic scenario for humanity where they're facing a reproductive crisis, because if that sperm count decrease line just continues the way it's going, it would hit 0. Will it? Who knows? But it would just be funny to put humanity into the position where they had to either choose to go vegan or die out as a species. I don't know why that's so funny. We've exhausted all options except going vegan. It's not worth it. We must let humanity die. Bacon will be our last words. I'm now changing the title of my e-cookbook, linked below, to the Vegan Sperm Cookbook. Yes, now it's a new book. In the end, I would love to see a larger study. I'd love to see different populations, and I'd really love to see a randomized control trial to see what would happen before and after going vegan to this count. But with this study, as small as it is, we are seeing a shocking variation, really, in terms of sperm count and some quality metrics, like that hyper or rapid mobility that is 17 times different. Anyway, we would need that type of study to fully justify the recommendation for people to go vegan in order to improve their fertility and their sperm count going forward. Oh, so why did you go vegan? My count. Of animal death in the world. I did it for the animals. Yep. All right, let me know down below what you think about all of this, and feel free to like and subscribe, share, whatever you want to do to help me out is great. And buy the Sperm Cookbook. Anyway, thanks for watching. See you next time.